Page 95, Minuet. Person they're talking about, Mozart, a very famous composer, did a lot of stuff. He wrote this, I guess. This is an arrangement, of course. Uses dotted rhythm sometimes, you'll see them in there. Now, this is 3/4 time. Now we're counting quarter notes, so now you gotta go back to the 1-eanda. Well, you got 16th notes in the last measure of the first line anyway, and those are 1-eanda, 2-eanda, 3-eanda, 4-eanda. Ugh. I want to make a few minor suggestions to the fingering in the right hand here. Starting at the top, you're fine with the 1 and 2. In the next measure, it's fine with the 2 and 4. It's a little bit tricky in the last measure with the 16th notes because you're using the weak fingers, but if you're going to play piano, you got to learn to use those fingers, so do it. It's 5, 4. Next measure, you're starting out 1/4, but the problem is in the next measure they want the 2 on the D. It's hard to go from here to here. So I would recommend you start out 1/4, but on the last 8th note of that measure, you switch to 1/2. Then in the next measure you use 3/4/5. Now that I can do okay. And then 4th finger on the F sharp. But in the next to the last measure, second line, I recommend you're starting 5-1, 1-5. I recommend a 4 on the E, then a 3, and then for the G, C sharp is a 1-2. And then you can do a 1-3 if you want, or whatever. This way, it's not quite so tricky on moving. Otherwise, no, I don't like that. The melody's the top note. You connect the melody. You may not be able to connect the bottom note all that well, but make sure you connect that melody. And the third line, again, I don't like using the same finger on repeated notes. But if that's a tricky end, a black note is harder to switch. So if you want to use 3s on all those, go ahead. But on the second measure, on the 2 Ds, I recommend a 1-2. It's safer than a 1-1. On the next measure with the Cs, here you can do a 1-2-1-2. Last line, first measure. It's up to you which fingers you use. I'd still alternate 2 different fingers on those. Then for the last 2 measures, you're going to play a 1-5 for the EC. I recommend a 4 for the A, and then a 1-2 for the C F sharp, and then a 1-3 for the half note. You want to connect the top note. It's the melody. That's what we want. Play it a little louder if you can too than the other note. Bring it out. In the left hand, look at the first 4 notes in the left hand. You have a G, a B, a D, and a G again. That's a chord. It's like a broken chord. And the fingering is to put the 4th finger on the B, not the 3rd. So I recommend the 4th finger. Then for the 8th notes, the first G, use 2nd finger. For the repeated note, it's up to you what you're going to do, but I would still prefer to alternate 2 notes. You can do 2-1-2. You work out a fingering that you kind of like, but I would still encourage you to use different alternating fingers or something on those repeated notes if you can. We have a little contrast going on here, of course. Starting with the 3rd line, the left hand, suddenly it's all smooth and legato. Because up above, you can separate those notes if you want to. It's an interpretive thing, but they're telling you specifically when you start that 3rd line, make sure you connect them. Now they're doing it according to the measure. You could connect the whole line. You don't have to do it according to the measure. I think what they've done is they've taken the orchestra and they've reduced it down to this, and because the orchestra has slurs in here for the violins or whoever's playing this, they kept them. What they don't understand is that these slur lines, or these marking the curved lines that you're seeing, mean different things to different instruments. For instance, if it's a string instrument like a cello or a violin or something, this is telling you how to bow it. So you're going to bow the first measure all in one bow, maybe a down bow, pull it, and then the second measure you're going to do an up bow. But in piano, they're telling us phrasing and slurs and stuff. So I recommend you slur that whole line, going into the first two measures of the second line, connect it all. Now I can do that because I'm in the end of the third line, I'm playing a thumb. I can scrunch my hand up and catch that and connect it. They're pointing out a clef change at the end of the third line. The clefs can change anywhere, on either staff, at any time. The key signature can only change between the measures at a measure line. But it can be any measure line, so you can have key signature changes everywhere. The time signature can change at a measure line. It needs to be at a measure line, but you can have any number of time signature changes in a piece. It can get really interesting, not that it isn't already, but just point out that in the left hand in the last line for the first two measures, that's treble clef. So that is a middle C, you're up here. They could write it in bass clef, but they'd have so many ledger lines above it, it makes it harder to read. Then the last two measures, the bass clef comes back and you're back down here. Now there's a repeat sign at the end of the second line, so we're going to play the first two lines twice. Then there's repeat signs for the last two lines, one at the beginning, so we're going to play the last two lines twice. If the reverse repeat sign were not at the beginning of the third line, say you only had a repeat sign at the end of the second line and at the end of the last line, you would play the first two lines twice. You're going to repeat it. Then you'd go all the way down to the bottom, and then you'd repeat. You go back to the beginning, and you'd play all four lines once. The idea is that if you're going to go back and play a repeated section again, you don't repeat it the second time. You just play it through. So the repeat sign is only good for one time. If they wanted you to repeat it again, they have to put in a note, repeat second time. However, we don't have to worry about that. They put in a reverse repeat sign. So 3/4 time, slowly, will give us 3 counts. I put the metronome on 60, it's beating quarter notes. So those 16th notes are going to move, because it's 1 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 E and a. They're going to move. I'll give us 3 counts, so let's play this. No pedal. 1, ready and go, and. Repeat. Repeat.